Carter Mitchell had everything calculated for that Monday morning. Coffee at 6:45 a.m., quarterly reports until 7:30, investor meeting at 8 sharp. What he didn't calculate was that Emma Thompson, his most spirited marketing coordinator, would burst through the glass doors 40 minutes late with a coffee stain decorating her crisp white blazer. "I'm so sorry. The subway was delayed and there was this elderly gentleman who needed help with Miss Thompson." Carter's Arctic tone sliced through the mahogany-paneled boardroom like winter wind. "We have Tokyo investors who've been cooling their heels for 15 minutes. Emma felt 12 pairs of eyes laser focus on her. The silence pressed down like a weighted blanket. Carter stood there in his charcoal Armani suit, every silver hair perfectly in place, radiating the kind of authority that made grown CEOs stammer. Beside his polished perfection, she felt like a community college student who'd rolled out of bed 5 minutes ago. "I realize I'm behind schedule, but punctuality isn't negotiable in this business, Miss Thompson." Carter straightened his platinum cufflinks with that precise gesture Emma had learned meant incoming corporate lecture. While you were playing Good Samaritan, a $3 million partnership sat gathering dust. That's when Emma's internal fuse finally blew. Heat crawled up her throat as months of frustration bubbled over. Everyone in this glass tower earned more in bonuses than she made all year, lived in Manhattan penthouses while she shared a Brooklyn apartment with 2 roommates, and she still had to endure speeches about subway delays. "You want to know something?" Emma dropped her portfolio with a satisfying thunk that made the Tokyo delegation jump in perfect synchronization. "I was late because I helped a veteran find his way to the VA office. You know why? Because unlike certain people in this room, I remember what it's like to be human." Carter's left eyebrow climbed toward his hairline. "I fail to see the relevance." "The relevance is that you exist in a climate-controlled bubble." Emma felt years of pent-up workplace frustration explode like a shaken champagne bottle. "You have zero connection to how regular people actually live, floating around in your penthouse kingdom, surrounded by people who agree with everything you say, never forming one genuine relationship. That's exactly why the entire office calls you the Emperor of Loneliness." The silence that crashed down could have suffocated a small animal. Carter's face cycled through 3 distinct shades of pale before settling on a dangerous calm. The Tokyo investors exchanged rapid whispers, clearly wishing they were anywhere but witnessing this corporate meltdown. Emma's stomach dropped to her shoes. Sweet mother of pearl. She just publicly humiliated the billionaire founder of Mitchell Enterprises in front of international partners. She was toast. Worse than toast, she was burnt crumbs scattered to the 4 winds. "This meeting is postponed," Carter announced with the emotional temperature of liquid nitrogen. "We'll reconvene tomorrow morning." As the boardroom emptied like a sinking ship, only Emma and Carter remained. She braced for volcanic eruption, termination threats, maybe a personal escort from building security. Instead, Carter studied her with the intensity of a scientist examining a particularly interesting specimen. "Emperor of Loneliness," he repeated, rolling the phrase around like fine wine. "Mr. Mitchell, I completely lost my... Is that the consensus around here?" Emma's throat felt lined with sandpaper. "Sir, I was having a really bad morning." "Answer the question, Miss Thompson." "Yes," she barely whispered. Carter moved to the wall of windows overlooking the Manhattan skyline, hands clasped behind his back like a general surveying a battlefield. Fascinating. When he turned back, Emma caught a glint of something almost predatory in his steel blue eyes. "You've just handed me the solution to a very expensive problem." "A solution?" "Congratulations, Miss Thompson. You're not getting fired." The smile that spread across Carter's face belonged in a shark documentary. "You just landed the most unusual promotion in corporate history." Emma blinked hard enough to create wind. "I don't understand." "You're going to be my girlfriend." "I'm going to be your what?" Carter looked immensely pleased with her reaction. "You've pointed out that I'm disconnected from authentic human experience. Well, you're going to help me remedy that situation." "Mr. Mitchell, have you completely lost your marbles?" My marbles are exactly where they belong. I have 6 high-profile social functions over the next month. Charity auctions, museum galas, the annual Mitchell Foundation dinner. I need someone genuine and relatable by my side. Emma collapsed into the nearest leather chair like her strings had been cut. But why me? Because you just demonstrated you're the only person in this building with enough backbone to tell me the truth. Carter resumed his predatory pacing. Plus, you obviously need the financial incentive. He had her there. Her paycheck disappeared faster than ice cream in July, especially with her student loans and her contribution to her parents' mortgage back in Ohio. But fake dating her impossibly attractive, completely impossible boss. What's the compensation? She heard herself ask, immediately wanting to crawl under the conference table. $7,000 per appearance, starting this Friday. Emma's vision went slightly blurry. 7,000? American currency, not monopoly money. Try to contain your excitement. She studied him. That perfectly sculpted jaw, those penetrating blue eyes, shoulders that probably had their own zip code under that tailored jacket. Carter Mitchell was magazine cover gorgeous, but he was also controlling, arrogant, and apparently several sandwiches short of a picnic. What if I decline this insane offer? You'll be terminated for creating a hostile work environment in front of valued clients. His shrug could have powered a small wind turbine. Entirely your decision. Emma squeezed her eyes shut. $7,000. That was more than she made in 2 months, and based on his tone, choice was purely theoretical. What exactly happens Friday? Carter's grin could have lit up Times Square. Family dinner, hope you like seafood. You want me to lie to your mother? Emma nearly launched her designer coffee cup, which Carter had somehow procured from that ridiculously expensive place in Soho, straight into orbit. That's ethically problematic. Carter adjusted his reading glasses, the ones he only wore for documents and that Emma found annoyingly attractive, and continued flipping through what appeared to be a relationship manual he'd printed from the internet. It's not lying, it's method acting. That's literally the same thing. Incorrect. Lying involves fabricating facts. Method acting involves inhabiting an alternate reality temporarily. Emma stared at him. Did you just make that distinction up? Quite possibly. They were holed up in his corner office, a space with floor-to-ceiling windows that probably cost more than Emma's entire childhood home. Carter had instructed his assistant to clear his afternoon schedule for what he called girlfriend boot camp. Listen, Mr. Mitchell. Carter, if we're dating, you can't call me Mr. Mitchell. It sounds like you're asking for a raise. Emma rubbed her temples. Okay, Carter. This whole scheme is absolutely bananas. Your family is going to see right through me. Doubtful. Carter made a note in the margin of his printout. According to this WikiHow article, successful fake relationships require only 3 elements: believable backstory, consistent physical contact, and shared inside jokes. You're getting relationship advice from WikiHow? It had 4.5 stars. Emma wondered if it was too late to update her resume. What's our backstory supposed to be? Carter consulted his notes like he was preparing for a board meeting. We met when you spilled coffee on me in the elevator 6 months ago. You apologized profusely. I was charmed by your authenticity, and we've been secretly dating ever since. That's actually not terrible. I'm excellent at strategic planning. Emma found herself almost smiling before catching herself. What about the physical contact part? Carter looked up from his papers and Emma caught something flickering in his expression. We'll need to practice appropriate couple behavior. Hand-holding, casual touches, sitting close together. Practice? Stand up. What? We're practicing stand up. Emma reluctantly got to her feet. Carter moved around his desk and stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she could smell his cologne. Something expensive and woodsy that made her stomach do weird little flips. Give me your hand. Emma hesitated, then placed her hand in his. Carter's palm was warm and surprisingly calloused for a billionaire CEO. His fingers closed around hers with gentle firmness. See? Natural couple behavior. But Carter's voice sounded slightly strained. and Emma noticed he wasn't making eye contact. This feels incredibly weird. It's supposed to feel natural. We're practicing. You're sweating. Carter dropped her hand like it was radioactive. I don't sweat. I perspire minimally due to optimal temperature regulation. Emma bit back a laugh. Did you just science-explain sweating? I explained a biological process with precision. You're nervous. I'm never nervous. I'm occasionally highly focused. Emma studied his face. His perfectly composed mask had developed tiny cracks, and she could see something almost vulnerable underneath. When was the last time you held hands with someone? Carter straightened his tie unnecessarily. That's irrelevant to our current objective. Carter, it's been some time. How much time? Carter returned to his desk and shuffled papers with intense concentration. Perhaps we should move on to conversation topics. My mother will expect us to know details about each other. Emma wasn't ready to let him off the hook. What's your favorite color? Navy blue. What's yours? Sunset orange. What's your biggest fear? Carter paused mid-paper shuffle. Failure of fiduciary responsibility to shareholders. That's not a real fear. That's a corporate mission statement. It's my genuine concern. Emma moved closer to his desk. Come on, what actually keeps you up at night? Carter met her eyes for a long moment. Being exactly what you said I was, the emperor of loneliness. The admission hung in the air between them like morning fog. Emma felt something shift in her chest, an unexpected softening toward this impossible man who seemed to have everything except the one thing that mattered most. Carter. His phone buzzed, shattering the moment. Carter snatched it up like a lifeline. Mitchell. What? When? I'll be right there. He hung up and was already reaching for his jacket. Emergency meeting. The Tokyo deal is imploding. What about our practice session? Carter paused at the door. Tomorrow. We'll finish this tomorrow. He turned back, and Emma caught that vulnerable expression again. Emma? Thank you for agreeing to this madness. Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving Emma alone in his enormous office with the lingering scent of his cologne and the strangest feeling that she'd just glimpsed the real Carter Mitchell hidden beneath all that expensive armor. She walked to his desk and picked up the WikiHow printout. In the margin next to shared inside jokes, Carter had written in his precise handwriting, "Figure out what makes Emma laugh." Emma stared at the note for a full minute, something warm and dangerous blooming in her chest. This fake relationship was going to be way more complicated than either of them had anticipated. Her phone buzzed with a text from Carter. Dinner Friday at 7. Wear something blue. My mother thinks it brings out people's eyes. Emma texted back, how do you know what color brings out my eyes? 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, lucky guess? Emma found herself grinning at her phone like a teenager. This was either going to be the best decision she'd ever made, or it was going to destroy them both. Possibly both. Emma stood outside the most intimidating restaurant in Manhattan, wearing a blue dress that had cost her 3 weeks of lunch money, trying to remember how to breathe like a normal human being. The maitre d' had already looked her up and down twice with the expression of someone who'd found gum on their Italian leather shoes. Carter appeared beside her like magic, looking devastatingly handsome in a navy suit that probably cost more than her rent. You look. He paused, his usual corporate vocabulary apparently failing him. Blue suits you. Thanks. You look like you're about to negotiate world peace. Similar stress levels, actually. Carter offered his arm with the stiff formality of someone who'd learned manners from a textbook. Shall we? The hostess led them through a dining room that screamed old money louder than a foghorn. Every table held people who looked like they summered in the Hamptons and wintered in their own private islands. Emma felt like she was wearing a neon sign that blinked, "Doesn't belong here." There they are. Carter's voice carried a note Emma had never heard before, something between affection and mild terror. The Mitchell family table looked like a Ralph Lauren advertisement come to life. Carter's mother, Victoria, was an elegant woman in her 60s with silver hair swept into a perfect chignon. and the kind of poise that came from generations of good breeding. His father, Richard, had the distinguished gray at the temples look of a man who'd probably been handsome enough to stop traffic in his youth. And then there was the sister. Carter. The blonde tornado that launched itself at Carter had to be Madison, and she was everything Emma had feared. Gorgeous, polished, and radiating the confidence of someone who'd never doubted her place in the world. Madison. Carter submitted to his sister's enthusiastic hug with the patience of long practice. "Everyone, I'd like you to meet Emma Thompson." Victoria Mitchell's smile was warm but assessing, like a jewelry appraiser examining a potentially valuable piece. "Emma, how lovely to finally meet you. Carter's been surprisingly secretive about his personal life." "Mrs. Mitchell, it's wonderful to meet you." Emma shook hands, trying not to wince at Victoria's perfect manicure compared to her own hastily painted nails. "Thank you for including me tonight. Please call me Victoria. Any woman who can capture my son's attention for more than 5 minutes deserves first-name privileges." Richard Mitchell stood with old-school courtesy. "Emma, welcome to the family chaos. I hope Carter warned you about us." "He mentioned you were spirited," Emma said diplomatically. Madison laughed, a sound like silver bells in a gentle breeze. "Spirited? Is that what he called us? Carter, you diplomatic snake." She turned to Emma with frank curiosity. "So how did you two really meet? And don't give us that elevator coffee story he rehearsed with Mother on the phone." Emma's blood turned to ice water. Carter had rehearsed their fake story with his mother. We... Carter's hand found hers under the table, his fingers interlacing with surprising naturalness. Madison enjoys making people uncomfortable. It's her superpower. "Among others," Madison grinned unrepentantly. "But seriously, Emma, what's it like dating the Tin Man? Has he discovered he has a heart yet?" "Madison," Victoria chided gently. Emma felt Carter tense beside her. This was it, their first real test. She could play it safe, give some generic answer, or she could take a leap of faith. "Actually," Emma said, squeezing Carter's hand, "he's nothing like what I expected. Everyone told me he was this cold, unapproachable corporate robot, but when I really got to know him..." She glanced at Carter, surprised by the intensity in his eyes. "He's incredibly thoughtful. Last week he noticed I was stressed about my student loans and quietly arranged for the company to offer tuition reimbursement for marketing certifications." Carter stared at her. That hadn't happened. Emma was improvising wildly, but something shifted in his expression. "He also," Emma continued, warming to her theme, "remembers every coffee order for everyone on our floor. Not because he has to, but because he pays attention to the small things that make people happy." Victoria and Richard exchanged a meaningful look. Madison's eyebrows had climbed toward her hairline. "Well," Richard said slowly, "that's unexpectedly romantic for our Carter." Carter found his voice. "Emma brings out sides of me I didn't know existed." The waiter appeared to take drink orders, giving Emma a moment to process what had just happened. She'd completely made up those details about Carter, but the way he was looking at her now, like she'd just handed him something precious, made her wonder if she'd accidentally hit closer to the truth than she'd intended. "So, Emma," Victoria said once their wine had arrived, "tell us about yourself. What do you do when you're not keeping our workaholic son grounded?" "I work in marketing at Mitchell Enterprises, actually. I also volunteer at a literacy program in Brooklyn on weekends." Emma took a sip of wine that probably cost more than her monthly Metro card. "I'm from Ohio originally. Small town called Millfield." "Ohio." Richard's eyes lit up. "I grew up in Columbus. What part?" Emma relaxed slightly. Finally, something she could talk about honestly. "Southeastern Ohio. My dad teaches high school history. My mom's a nurse at the local hospital." "Salt of the earth people," Richard nodded approvingly. "That explains a lot about why Carter's been different lately." "Different how?" Carter asked, sounding genuinely curious. Madison laughed. "Are you kidding? 2 months ago, you forgot Mom's birthday because you were in back-to-back meetings. Last week, you called her just to chat. Just to chat, Carter. You, who considers small talk a waste of valuable resources. Emma glanced at Carter, who looked like he'd been caught stealing cookies. I may have been reassessing my priorities. He's been smiling at work, Emma added impishly. It's terrifying, his employees. I don't smile, Carter protested. I express measured approval through facial muscle adjustment. The entire table burst into laughter, including Carter himself, and Emma felt something warm unfurl in her chest. For a moment, she forgot this was all pretend. Carter's hand was still holding hers, his thumb tracing absent circles on her palm that were making it very difficult to concentrate on conversation. Emma, Victoria said during a lull in conversation, I have to ask, what are your intentions with my son? The question hit like a bucket of ice water. Emma opened her mouth, then closed it, acutely aware that everyone was staring at her. Carter's grip on her hand tightened. Mother, that's rather direct. I'm 73 years old, darling. I don't have time for subtlety. Victoria's eyes never left Emma's face. Carter's been hurt before by women who were more interested in his bank account than his heart. I need to know you're not one of them. Emma felt the weight of 3 generations of Mitchell family scrutiny. The honest answer, that she was literally being paid to be here, would destroy Carter and probably traumatize his mother. But looking at Carter's carefully neutral expression, she realized he was just as invested in her answer as his family was. Mrs. Mitchell. Victoria, Emma said carefully. I can't promise I'll never hurt him. People hurt each other sometimes, even when they don't mean to. But I can promise that your son's money means absolutely nothing to me compared to the man he is underneath all that expensive armor. Silence stretched across the table like a held breath. Then Victoria smiled. Not her polite social smile, but something genuine and warm. Good answer, dear. Richard, I like her. So do I. Richard raised his wine glass. To Emma, for seeing what the rest of the world misses about our Carter. As they toasted, Emma caught Carter staring at her with an expression that made her pulse skip. For just a moment, she saw him the way his family did. Not the intimidating CEO, but a man who'd been waiting his whole life for someone to see past his defenses. This fake relationship was becoming dangerously real, and Emma wasn't sure either of them was prepared for what that meant. Emma stared at her reflection in the ladies' room mirror of Manhattan's most exclusive charity gala, wondering when her life had become a romantic comedy screenplay written by someone with a twisted sense of humor. 3 weeks into their fake relationship, and she was wearing a dress that cost more than her car, pretending to be in love with a man who made her pulse race every time he looked at her with those impossibly blue eyes. The problem was the pretending part was becoming increasingly difficult. Pull yourself together, Thompson, she muttered to her reflection. It's just a business arrangement. A very well-paid, incredibly confusing, emotionally devastating business arrangement. Her phone buzzed with a text from Carter. Where are you? The Hendersons are asking about our anniversary plans. Emma typed back. What anniversary plans? The ones we're apparently making up right now. May have told them we're thinking of going to Paris. Paris? It seemed romantic. Isn't that where couples go in movies? Emma dropped her head into her hands. Carter Mitchell, billionaire CEO and master strategist, was getting his relationship advice from rom-coms. This fake dating situation was spiraling into territory that required its own GPS system. She returned to the ballroom to find Carter surrounded by a cluster of Manhattan's social elite, all hanging on his every word like he was dispensing stock tips instead of discussing quarterly projections. He looked devastatingly handsome in his black tuxedo, bow tie perfectly straight, every silver hair in place. When he spotted her approaching, his entire face lit up in a way that made her stomach perform Olympic-level gymnastics. There she is, Carter said, extending his hand to draw her into the circle. Emma, you remember the Hendersons from the hospital board? Margaret Henderson, a woman who looked like she'd been carved from marble and polished to perfection, smiled with the warmth of an iceberg. Emma, dear, Carter was just telling us about your romantic getaway plans. Paris in springtime. How wonderfully cliché. Emma felt Carter tense beside her. Actually, we're still discussing the details. "Oh, but you simply must stay at the Hotel Plaza Athénée," interrupted James Henderson, a man whose bow tie probably cost more than Emma's monthly rent. "Victoria and I honeymooned there 30 years ago. The view of the Eiffel Tower from the Eiffel Suite is absolutely magical." "The Eiffel Suite?" Emma squeaked. "Penthouse level, darling. 2 bedrooms, private terrace, champagne service." Margaret's eyes glittered with something that might have been mischief if it weren't so terrifying. Perfect for a couple planning to take their relationship to the next level. Carter's hand found Emma's waist, pulling her closer with what appeared to be casual affection but felt like a lifeline. "We're taking things at our own pace." "How refreshingly old-fashioned," Margaret cooed. "Though I must say, Carter, you seem absolutely smitten. I've never seen you so animated." Before Carter could respond, a commotion near the entrance caught everyone's attention. Emma turned to see a woman in a stunning red dress making her way through the crowd, leaving a wake of whispers and turned heads behind her. Emma felt Carter go absolutely rigid beside her. "Well, well," Margaret Henderson's smile turned predatory. "Look who decided to show up. This should be interesting." The woman in red was gorgeous in that effortless way that suggested good genes, expensive treatments, and a personal trainer who probably charged more than Emma made in 6 months. She had the kind of platinum blonde hair that only came from the most exclusive salons and legs that went on for approximately 17 miles. "Who is that?" Emma whispered to Carter, though she was already dreading the answer. "Vanessa Sinclair," Carter said through gritted teeth. "My ex-fiancée." Emma's stomach dropped like a broken elevator. "You're what?" But before Carter could explain, Vanessa had spotted them and was gliding over with the predatory grace of a shark who'd just detected blood in the water. "Carter," Vanessa purred, her voice carrying the kind of sultry undertones that probably made grown men forget their own names. "You look absolutely divine. Success suits you." She leaned in to air-kiss Carter's cheeks with the familiarity of someone who'd done it 1,000 times before. Emma noticed that Vanessa's perfume was subtle and expensive, the kind that whispered rather than screamed, unlike Emma's drugstore fragrance that was currently having a full-volume panic attack. "Vanessa." Carter's voice could have flash-frozen tropical fruit. "What are you doing here?" "Supporting charity, darling. Same as you." Vanessa's eyes shifted to Emma with the calculating precision of a jeweler, appraising a questionable diamond. "And you must be Carter's new friend." The pause before friend lasted approximately 3 centuries. "Emma Thompson," Emma managed, extending her hand with more confidence than she felt. "Carter's girlfriend." Vanessa's handshake was firm and brief, accompanied by a smile that belonged in a dental advertisement for predators. "How lovely. I'm Vanessa Sinclair. Carter and I have quite a history together." "Ancient history," Carter interjected quickly. "Oh, Carter, don't be modest." Vanessa's laugh tinkled like expensive wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "We were engaged for 2 years. I practically lived in his penthouse. I still remember exactly how he likes his coffee in the morning." Emma felt like she'd been slapped with a silk glove. "Engaged?" "For 2 years," Vanessa repeated, clearly enjoying Emma's discomfort. "We were planning the most gorgeous wedding. 300 guests, reception at the Met, Vera Wang dress that cost more than most people's cars." Carter's jaw looked like it had been carved from granite. "It didn't work out." "No," Vanessa agreed, her eyes never leaving Emma's face. "It didn't. Tell me, Emma, how long have you and Carter been together?" Emma felt like she was taking a final exam in a subject she'd never studied. 6 months. 6 months, Vanessa repeated thoughtfully. "Still in the honeymoon phase, then. Everything probably seems absolutely perfect." "It is perfect," Emma said, surprised by the fierceness in her own voice. Vanessa's smile could have cut glass. "Oh, darling, that's exactly what I thought too. Carter can be absolutely charming when he wants something. The flowers, the romantic dinners, the undivided attention. It's intoxicating." Carter stepped closer to Emma, his hand settling possessively on her lower back. "Vanessa, I think you've made your point. Have I?" Vanessa tilted her head like a curious cat. I'm just sharing my experience. See, the thing about Carter is that he's absolutely wonderful at the beginning. Attentive, romantic, everything a girl could want. But once the novelty wears off, she let the sentence hang in the air like a sword over Emma's head. Once the novelty wears off, what? Emma heard herself ask, though part of her really didn't want to know the answer. Vanessa's expression turned almost sympathetic. He gets bored, sweetie. His work becomes more important than you do. You'll start eating dinner alone, spending weekends by yourself, having conversations with his voicemail instead of him. And eventually, you'll realize you're just another acquisition in his portfolio. The words hit Emma like physical blows. She glanced at Carter, expecting him to deny it, to defend himself, to say something that would make Vanessa's accusations crumble like stale cookies. Instead, Carter looked like he'd been carved from stone, his expression unreadable. That's not, Emma started. True, Vanessa finished gently. Ask him about the night he missed our engagement party because of a conference call with Tokyo investors, or the weekend in Napa he canceled because of quarterly projections, or the Christmas morning he spent on his laptop instead of opening presents. Each example landed like a punch to Emma's solar plexus. She could see it all so clearly. Carter in his pristine office, choosing spreadsheets over relationships, numbers over emotions, success over love. Emma, Carter said quietly, it's not what you think. Isn't it? Emma's voice sounded strange to her own ears. Be honest, Carter. When was the last time you prioritized a relationship over a business deal? Carter opened his mouth, then closed it, his silence more damning than any words could have been. Vanessa looked almost pitying. I'm sorry, darling. I know this is hard to hear, but I'd rather you find out now than waste 2 years of your life the way I did. The ballroom suddenly felt suffocating. Emma needed air, space, somewhere to process the fact that her fake relationship was colliding headfirst with Carter's very real romantic history. If you'll excuse me, Emma said with as much dignity as she could muster, I need some fresh air. She turned and walked toward the terrace doors, her heels clicking against the marble floor like a metronome counting down to disaster. Behind her, she could hear Carter calling her name, but she didn't turn around. The terrace overlooking Central Park was blissfully empty and mercifully cool. Emma gripped the marble railing and tried to remember how to breathe normally. The city sparkled below her like scattered diamonds, beautiful and distant, and completely indifferent to her emotional meltdown. Emma. She turned to find Carter standing in the doorway, bow tie slightly askew, looking more disheveled than she'd ever seen him. Don't, she said, holding up a hand. Just don't. She was right about some things, Carter said quietly, stepping onto the terrace. About the engagement party, about Napa, about Christmas morning. Emma felt her heart crack like thin ice. Carter. But she was wrong about the most important thing. Carter moved closer, his eyes never leaving her face. She said I got bored. That work became more important. That's not why we broke up. Then why? Carter was quiet for so long, Emma thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Because I realized I was trying to love someone who was essentially a beautiful, polished version of myself. Same background, same values, same expectations. It was like dating an attractive mirror. He stepped closer, close enough that Emma could see the vulnerability he usually kept hidden. She wanted me to be exactly who I already was. Successful, driven, emotionally unavailable. It was comfortable. Emma's heart was beating so hard she was sure he could hear it. And comfortable was enough? I thought it was. Until 6 months ago when this woman spilled coffee on me in an elevator and apologized so sincerely I forgot how to be annoyed. Until she challenged everything I thought I knew about myself and made me want to be better. Carter's hand reached up to cup her cheek. Until I realized I was falling for someone who sees right through my expensive armor and somehow likes what she finds underneath. Emma's breath caught in her throat. Carter. This started as fake, Emma, but somewhere between family dinner and tonight, it became the most real thing in my life. The confession hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. Emma studied his face in the soft glow of the city lights, seeing past the perfect facade to the man beneath, flawed, vulnerable, and utterly sincere. "This is supposed to be pretend," she whispered. "I know. We had rules. I know. This is going to complicate everything." Carter's thumb traced her cheekbone with infinite gentleness. "I know. The question is, do you want to stop pretending too?" Before Emma could answer, the terrace doors burst open behind them. "Carter!" Madison's voice carried a note of panic that made them both turn. "We have a problem. Vanessa's inside telling everyone who'll listen that Emma's a fraud. She says she has proof you're paying her to be here." Emma felt the blood drain from her face. "What kind of proof?" Madison looked between them with growing alarm. "She has photos of Emma going into a boutique with Carter's credit card. She's claiming the whole relationship is an elaborate PR stunt." Carter cursed under his breath. "How could she possibly have—" He stopped, realization dawning on his face. "The shopping trip, when I took you to get that dress for Mom's birthday dinner." Emma remembered that afternoon, Carter insisting she needed something appropriate for family events. His credit card pressed into her hand despite her protests, his driver waiting outside while she tried on clothes that cost more than her monthly salary. "Someone was following us?" Emma asked, feeling sick. Madison nodded grimly. "Looks like it. And now half of Manhattan's social elite think you're a high-priced escort." The words hit Emma like a physical blow. She could see it all unraveling, her reputation, her job, her future. Worse, she could see the scandal reflecting on Carter, damaging everything he'd built. "I have to go," Emma said, stepping away from Carter's touch. "Emma, wait." "No, Carter. This is exactly what I was afraid of. I don't belong in your world, and now everyone knows it." She looked back at him one more time, memorizing his face. "Thank you for the most beautiful 3 weeks of my life. But this is where our story ends." She pushed past Madison and back into the ballroom, where conversations stopped and heads turned as she walked by. Emma could feel the weight of 100 stares, the whispered speculations, the judgment of people who'd never had to choose between pride and a paycheck. She made it to the elevator before the tears started, and by the time the doors closed, she was sobbing into her hands, her heart breaking for a love that had been real for exactly 10 minutes before reality came crashing back down. Behind her, she could hear Carter calling her name, but the elevator doors had already sealed her fate. Some fairy tales, Emma realized, were too good to be true. Carter Mitchell stood in the center of his penthouse office at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, staring at the city that never slept while feeling like he might never sleep again. The floor was littered with crumpled papers, failed attempts at speeches, apologies, explanations, and one particularly pathetic poem that he'd immediately fed to his industrial shredder out of pure embarrassment. It had been 4 days since the charity gala disaster. 4 days since Emma had walked out of his life with her dignity intact and his heart in pieces. 4 days since his carefully constructed world had imploded like a controlled demolition, except there was nothing controlled about the aftermath. The tabloids were having a field day. "Billionaires, fake romance exposed," screamed from every newsstand. Social media was buzzing with hashtags like "charm fake boyfriend" and "paid for love." His mother had called 17 times. Madison had shown up at his apartment with ice cream and unsolicited relationship advice. His father had sent a text that simply read, "Fix this, son." But the worst part wasn't the public humiliation or the damage to his reputation. The worst part was that Emma had disappeared. She'd resigned via email, a formal, professional message that made no mention of their relationship, real or fake. Her apartment in Brooklyn was empty, her forwarding address a mystery. Her phone went straight to voicemail, where her cheerful voice promised to call back soon while Carter knew she never would. He'd hired 3 different private investigators. The first one quit after 2 days, claiming the case was above his pay grade emotionally. The second one was still working but had nothing to report except that Emma Thompson had apparently vanished into thin air. The third one had just delivered a report that made Carter's blood run cold. "Mr. Mitchell?" His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "I know it's late, but Detective Morrison from the third firm is here with an update." Carter straightened his tie, even though there was no one to see him except the city lights. "Send him in." Detective Morrison was a weathered man in his 50s who looked like he'd seen every kind of human drama imaginable, and was perpetually unimpressed by all of it. He settled into the chair across from Carter's desk with the heavy sigh of someone delivering bad news. "Found her," Morrison said without preamble. Carter's heart lurched. "Where?" "Small town in Ohio, place called Millfield where she grew up. She's staying with her parents." Morrison consulted his notes. Robert Thompson, high school history teacher. Linda Thompson, registered nurse at the local hospital. Nice people from what I could tell. Carter felt relief and panic in equal measure. How is she?" Morrison's expression softened slightly. "That's where things get complicated, Mr. Mitchell. See, I did some digging into why she left New York so suddenly." He pulled out a manila folder and spread several documents across Carter's desk. Medical bills, insurance forms, prescription receipts, all bearing Linda Thompson's name. Her mother's been fighting breast cancer for the past 8 months. Aggressive type, expensive treatment. The family's been drowning in medical debt. Morrison pointed to a particularly large bill. "Looks like your girl Emma was sending home most of her paycheck to help cover costs." Carter stared at the numbers, feeling like someone had punched him in the solar plexus. "She never said anything." "Gets worse. The mother's treatment got moved up to this week because the cancer's spreading faster than expected. Emma left because her family needs her." Morrison's voice carried a note of respect. "Kid chose her family over her career, over New York, over everything. That's rare these days." Carter ran his hands through his hair, his perfect composure finally cracking. "The money I was paying her for the fake dating. Probably the only thing keeping her mother alive," Morrison confirmed. The words hit Carter like a freight train. Emma hadn't been playing some game or looking for easy money. She'd been fighting a battle he'd never even known existed, carrying a burden that would have crushed most people, and she'd done it all with the same grace and humor that had made him fall in love with her. "There's more," Morrison continued. "After the scandal broke, the hospital where her mother was getting treatment suddenly decided they couldn't offer the payment plan they'd promised. Something about reputation concerns and public image. They want full payment up front now, or they'll have to transfer Mrs. Thompson to a county facility with a 6-month waiting list." Carter felt rage building in his chest like a controlled fire. "How much?" Morrison slid another paper across the desk. The number made Carter's breath catch. Not because it was large, he spent more than that on wine in a month, but because it represented everything Emma had been fighting for. "Mr. Mitchell," Morrison said carefully, "I've been doing this for 20 years. I've seen a lot of people in a lot of situations. That girl didn't fake anything with you. Whatever was happening between you two, it was real on her end." Carter stood and walked to his window, looking out at the city that had always been his kingdom, but now felt like a prison. "How do you know?" "Because when I was asking around about her in Millfield, everyone had the same story. Emma came home heartbroken, crying about leaving behind the first man she'd ever really loved. Said she'd rather lose her heart than lose her integrity." Morrison packed up his files. That's not the reaction of someone who was just doing a job. After Morrison left, Carter stood alone in his office, surrounded by the empire he'd built and the loneliness he'd earned. For the first time in his adult life, money couldn't solve his problem. He couldn't buy Emma's forgiveness or her love. He couldn't purchase his way back into her good graces, but he could do the right thing. Carter picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in 2 years. "Mitchell Holdings. This is Janet." "Janet, it's Carter. I need you to get me Richard Sinclair on the phone." "Mr. Sinclair. Sir, it's almost 4 a.m. "Then wake him up. Tell him it's about his daughter's little stunt at the charity gala." 20 minutes later, Carter was pacing his office while Richard Sinclair's voice came through the speakerphone, thick with sleep and confusion. "Carter, what's this about? Vanessa said you two had some kind of confrontation. Richard, I need you to listen very carefully. Your daughter destroyed an innocent woman's reputation based on half-truths and malicious speculation. As a result, that woman's mother is being denied medical treatment she desperately needs." Silence on the other end of the line. "Richard, are you there?" "I'm here, Carter. If this is about your girlfriend..." "It's about basic human decency." Carter's voice carried a steel that could cut glass. "Vanessa used private investigators to gather information about my personal life, and then weaponized that information to hurt someone who never did anything to her, except exist. Now wait just a minute. I'm not finished." Carter's voice rose to a volume that probably woke half of Manhattan. "Emma Thompson is the most genuine, compassionate, courageous person I've ever met. She took a job she was overqualified for, worked twice as hard as anyone else, and sent most of her paycheck home to help pay for her mother's cancer treatment. The money I paid her wasn't for fake affection. It was because I was falling in love with her and wanted to help her family without damaging her pride." Richard Sinclair was quiet for a long moment. "Carter, if this is true, it is true. And now, because your daughter couldn't stand seeing me happy with someone else, Mrs. Linda Thompson is going to die because her family can't afford treatment." The silence stretched so long, Carter thought the call had been dropped. "What do you want me to do?" Richard finally asked. "I want you to call every person Vanessa spoke to at that gala. I want you to tell them the truth, that they witnessed a jealous ex-fiancé destroying an innocent woman's life for sport. I want you to make sure that every hospital, every medical facility, every insurance company knows that Emma Thompson is under the personal protection of Mitchell Holdings. And if I refuse," Carter's smile was colder than a Manhattan winter, "then you'll discover exactly why they call me the Emperor of Loneliness, Richard. Because when I choose to be ruthless, I'm very, very good at it. Your construction contracts with the city, your development permits, your financing arrangements. I have friends in all those places. It would be unfortunate if they suddenly became very difficult to navigate." Another long pause. "You're threatening me. I'm promising you. The only question is whether you want to do the right thing because it's right, or because I'm forcing you to. Either way works for me." Richard Sinclair sighed heavily. "I'll make the calls, but Carter, what about you and the girl? This doesn't fix what happened between you." Carter looked out at the dawn breaking over New York City, painting the sky in shades of hope and possibility. "That's not your problem to solve, Richard. That's mine." After he hung up, Carter called his pilot. "Marcus, I need the jet ready in 2 hours." "Where are we going, Mr. Mitchell?" Carter smiled for the first time in 4 days. "Ohio." "And Marcus, stop at Tiffany's on the way to the airport. I need to pick something up." "Jewelry shopping at 5 a.m., sir?" The best battles require the proper weapons. While Marcus made arrangements, Carter sat down at his computer and began typing the most important business proposal of his life. Not a merger or acquisition or hostile takeover, a plan to win back the only thing that had ever truly mattered. At 6 a.m., his phone rang. Madison's name flashed on the screen. "Carter, please tell me you're not about to do something spectacularly stupid." "Define stupid." "Flying to Ohio to chase after a girl who probably never wants to see you again." Carter grinned. "Then yes, I'm about to do something spectacularly stupid." "Thank goodness," Madison laughed. "I was worried you were going to be sensible about this. Need backup?" "Actually, yes. Call Mom and Dad. Tell them to meet me in Ohio." "The whole family? Carter, what are you planning?" Carter looked at his reflection in his computer screen. Rumpled shirt, 5 o'clock shadow, eyes bright with purpose for the first time in days. "I'm planning to prove that sometimes the Emperor of Loneliness is willing to abdicate his throne for the right woman." He hung up, grabbed his coat, and headed for the elevator. 3 hours later, he was 30,000 feet in the air, flying toward the only gamble that had ever mattered. But first, he had one more call to make. "Mitchell Holdings Foundation, emergency line. Patricia, it's Carter. I need you to set up an immediate medical fund. How much are we talking about, Mr. Mitchell? Carter looked at the clouds rushing past his window, thinking about Emma's smile, her laugh, the way she'd defended him to his own family. Whatever it takes, he said. Whatever it takes to save the people Emma Thompson loves. The plane banked toward Ohio, carrying Carter toward the most important meeting of his life. He had no guarantee Emma would forgive him, no promise she'd take him back, no assurance this wouldn't end in complete disaster. But for the first time since he'd become the emperor of loneliness, Carter Mitchell was betting everything on love. And despite his terror, despite the odds, despite every logical reason this was doomed to fail, he'd never felt more hopeful in his life. Below him, the American heartland stretched toward the horizon like a promise of new beginnings, and Carter allowed himself to believe that sometimes fairy tales came true for emperors, foolish enough to give up their kingdoms. The jet engines hummed a song of possibility as Carter flew toward his future, carrying nothing but hope, determination, and a small blue box from Tiffany's that held either his salvation or his final defeat. Either way, he was about to find out if love really could conquer all, even the loneliness of an emperor who'd forgotten how to be just a man. Emma Thompson sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair beside her mother's hospital bed, holding Linda's hand and trying not to think about how much everything had changed in the past week. The oncology wing of Millfield General smelled like industrial disinfectant and broken dreams, a far cry from the glittering ballrooms of Manhattan, where she'd spent the most magical 3 weeks of her life pretending to be someone she wasn't. Except it hadn't felt like pretending. Not at the end. The morning sun filtered through the hospital window, casting long shadows across the linoleum floor that had seen too many tears, too many goodbyes, too many families fighting battles they couldn't win. Emma squeezed her mother's frail hand, marveling at how someone so small could contain such enormous strength. "Honey, you're brooding again," her mother said weakly, squeezing Emma's fingers with what little strength she had left. "I can practically hear the wheels turning in that busy brain of yours. You get that from me, you know. Your father just accepts things as they come. But we Thompson women, we analyze everything to death." Emma managed a smile for the woman who'd taught her everything about strength, grace, and putting family first. "Just thinking about work stuff, Mom. Nothing important." Linda Thompson raised an eyebrow, a gesture Emma had inherited along with her stubborn streak and her inability to lie convincingly. "Work stuff? You mean the billionaire CEO you fell in love with and left behind in New York? The one whose picture has been on the front page of every newspaper in Ohio for the past 3 days. Mom, Emma Jane Thompson, I raised you better than to lie to your sick mother." Linda's voice carried the authority of someone who'd spent 30 years as a pediatric nurse dealing with children who thought they could fool adults. "Your father told me about the news reports, about the fake relationship that wasn't so fake after all, about how you came running home with your heart in pieces, crying over a man you claimed was just your boss." Emma felt tears prick her eyes. She'd been so careful not to burden her parents with the details of her Manhattan disaster, but apparently small-town news traveled faster than private jets. "It's complicated, Mom." "Love usually is, sweetheart." Linda shifted carefully in her hospital bed, wincing as the movement pulled at her IV lines. The chemotherapy had taken so much from her. Her beautiful auburn hair, her rosy cheeks, 30 pounds she couldn't afford to lose. But it hadn't touched the sparkle in her green eyes or her uncanny ability to see straight through her daughter's defenses. But running away from complicated doesn't make it less complicated. It just makes it complicated and lonely. "I didn't run away," Emma protested, though even she could hear how unconvincing it sounded. "I came home because you needed me. I needed you to be happy more than I needed you to hold my hand through chemo." Linda's voice was gentle but firm. "Emma, honey, I've been fighting cancer for 8 months. I know what the odds are. I know what the doctors aren't telling us. And I know that the last thing I want is for you to spend what might be our final months together consumed with regret over a love you were too scared to fight for." The words hit Emma like a physical blow. She'd been trying so hard to protect her mother from additional stress, to be the strong daughter who had everything under control. That she'd forgotten her mother was still, fundamentally, a mother who wanted her child to be happy above all else. Before Emma could respond, her father appeared in the doorway, with 2 cups of coffee that looked like they'd been brewed sometime during the Clinton administration, and a newspaper tucked under his arm. "Ladies, we have a situation," Robert Thompson announced, his history teacher voice carrying the same tone he'd used to describe everything from the Boston Tea Party to Emma's teenage dating drama. "There's a circus setting up in our front yard, and I do mean circus." Emma frowned, her stomach already beginning to churn with a familiar dread. "A circus? 3 black SUVs that cost more than our house, 2 news vans from Columbus, 1 from Cincinnati, and what appears to be a very expensive private jet that just landed at the regional airport and caused Earl Patterson to spit his coffee all over the control tower." Robert handed Emma a cup of coffee and kissed Linda's forehead with the tender affection of 35 years of marriage. "Oh, and there's a man in a $3,000 suit asking Mrs. Henderson next door about your favorite flowers, your childhood pets, and whether you've always been stubborn as a mule." Emma's heart stopped, restarted, then began beating so fast she was sure her mother's heart monitor would start beeping in sympathy. "Carter's here? Unless we have another billionaire boyfriend you haven't told us about," Robert said dryly, settling into his chair and unfolding the newspaper. "Front page of the Columbus Dispatch, by the way. Billionaire's love quest leads to small town." They used that photo from the charity gala, where you both look like you're about to either kiss or commit murder. Linda struggled to sit up straighter, her eyes bright with excitement despite her exhaustion. "Well, don't just stand there, Emma. Go fix your hair and put on some lipstick. If that man flew all the way to Ohio, the least you can do is look presentable when you tell him off." "Mom, I'm not going to—" "Emma." Linda's voice carried 30 years of maternal authority, and the particular tone that had made teenage Emma confess to everything from broken curfews to borrowed sweaters. "That man is standing in our driveway at 8 o'clock in the morning, looking like he hasn't slept in a week, apparently conducting interviews with the entire neighborhood about your personal preferences. Whatever else happened between you, he came here for a reason. You owe it to yourself to find out what that reason is." Emma looked between her parents, her father trying to hide his curiosity behind his newspaper, while obviously listening to every word, her mother's eyes bright with the kind of matchmaking enthusiasm that had terrified Emma's high school boyfriends, and realized she was outnumbered. "Fine, but when this goes horribly wrong, I'm blaming both of you." She made her way through the hospital corridors feeling like she was walking toward either her salvation or her execution. The familiar hallways seemed longer than usual, each step echoing with the weight of everything she'd left unsaid in New York. Nurses who'd known her since childhood smiled sympathetically as she passed, their expressions carrying that particular small-town mixture of curiosity and concern that came with having everyone know your business before you knew it yourself. Through the main entrance windows, she could see the media circus her father had described. News vans from Columbus and Cincinnati lined the quiet residential street, their satellite dishes pointing skyward, like technological flowers reaching for the sun. Reporters with perfectly styled hair and expensive cameras interviewed neighbors who looked thrilled to be on television, probably for the first time in their lives. And there, in the center of it all, stood Carter Mitchell. He looked exactly like Emma remembered, and nothing like she'd expected. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, silver strands catching the morning sunlight at odd angles. His shirt was wrinkled, his tie crooked, his expensive jacket draped over his arm like an afterthought. He was holding what appeared to be an enormous bouquet of sunflowers, Emma's favorites, though she'd never told him that, and talking animatedly with Mrs. Henderson, who was clearly enjoying every minute of being interviewed by a billionaire. Emma could see him gesturing with his free hand, that precise way he moved when he was explaining something important. Even from this distance, she could tell he was nervous. There was a tension in his shoulders she'd learned to recognize during their weeks together, a tightness that appeared when he was out of his element, but determined to push forward anyway. Mrs. Henderson was nodding enthusiastically, occasionally pointing toward the Thompson house with the kind of authority that came from living next door to someone for 23 years. Emma caught fragments of conversation through the glass doors. Always loved sunflowers, even as a little girl. Stubborn as her mother, but twice as kind. Never seen her happier than when she came home from New York talking about some mysterious boyfriend. Emma stepped outside, and the circus immediately focused on her like she'd fired a starting gun. The morning air was crisp with the promise of autumn, carrying the scent of Mrs. Patterson's famous apple pie and the faint diesel smell of the news vans. Emma Thompson! Reporters surged forward with cameras and microphones like a perfectly coordinated swarm. Is it true you were paid to date Carter Mitchell? Are you really in love with him? Will you comment on the allegations of fraud? What's it like dating a billionaire? Do you plan to move back to New York? Emma felt overwhelmed by the chaos, the lights, the shouting questions that turned her quiet hometown morning into something resembling a Hollywood premiere. She started to retreat back into the hospital when Carter's voice cut through the noise like a sword through silk. That's enough. The authority in his tone made everyone, reporters, cameramen, curious neighbors walking their dogs, freeze like children caught misbehaving by a particularly stern teacher. Carter's CEO voice carried easily across the street, commanding attention with the same natural authority he used in boardrooms. He walked through the crowd, which parted before him like the Red Sea, his expensive shoes clicking against the sidewalk with determined precision. Up close, Emma could see the exhaustion in his blue eyes, the tension in his shoulders, the vulnerability he was trying so hard to hide behind his corporate mask. Emma, he said quietly. His voice meant only for her, despite the audience of 50 people hanging on every word. We need to talk. Emma's heart hammered against her ribs like a caged bird. Carter, what are you doing here? He held out the sunflowers with the awkward formality of someone who'd spent more time negotiating corporate mergers than romantic gestures. The bouquet was enormous, almost comically large, as if he'd asked for enough flowers to apologize for destroying someone's life. And the florist had taken him literally. I came to apologize, and to tell you the truth. All of it. His eyes searched her face with desperate intensity. I know I have no right to show up here like this, but Emma, I couldn't let things end the way they did. Not when. He stopped, glancing around at the cameras, the reporters, the neighbors who were pretending to water their gardens while obviously eavesdropping on every word. Emma followed his gaze, taking in the circus that had become her quiet hometown morning. Here? You want to do this in front of everyone? Carter's smile was rueful, tinged with the kind of self-deprecating humor she'd fallen in love with. I've spent my entire adult life hiding behind closed doors and private meetings, making deals in conference rooms where no one could see me fail or succeed. I figure it's time I tried radical honesty in broad daylight. He turned to address the crowd, his CEO voice carrying easily across the street with the kind of commanding presence that had built a billion-dollar empire. Ladies and gentlemen, since you're all here, and since this story has already become public property thanks to my own mistakes, I'd like to make a statement. The reporters perked up like hunting dogs catching a scent. Cameras focused with mechanical precision. Microphones extended like offering bowls. Smartphones started recording from every possible angle. My name is Carter Mitchell, and I'm here to publicly apologize to Emma Thompson and set the record straight about our relationship. Emma felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment and something that might have been pride. Carter, you don't have to. Yes, I do. He looked directly into the cameras, his expression serious and unflinchingly honest. 3 weeks ago, I asked Emma to pretend to be my girlfriend for a series of social events. I was paying her $7,000 per appearance. Gasps from the reporters. Emma wanted to disappear into the hospital's foundation, to sink through the sidewalk and emerge somewhere far away, where billionaires didn't make public confessions in hospital parking lots. But here's what the tabloids didn't report, Carter continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. Emma Thompson is the most genuine, compassionate, courageous person I've ever met. She took that job, not because she was greedy or opportunistic, but because she was quietly sending most of her salary home to help pay for her mother's cancer treatment. The crowd murmured, the energy shifting from scandalous excitement to something more sympathetic. Emma saw Mrs. Henderson nodding approvingly, saw the reporter's expression soften from predatory interest to genuine emotion. The money I paid her wasn't payment for fake affection. It was because I was falling in love with her and wanted to help her family without damaging her pride. Emma never asked for anything beyond what we agreed on. She never used my feelings for her own gain. She never took advantage of our arrangement. Carter's voice cracked slightly, the polished CEO facade finally showing real cracks. What Emma did was save me from a life I didn't realize was slowly killing me. She made me remember what it feels like to laugh, to be surprised, to look forward to something other than quarterly reports and board meetings. He turned back to Emma, and she saw years of carefully constructed walls crumbling in his eyes like ancient fortifications finally surrendering to time. She made me want to be the man she saw when she looked at me, someone worth loving, not just someone worth fearing or impressing or using for financial gain. She made me remember that success without someone to share it with is just expensive loneliness. Emma felt tears starting to fall despite her best efforts to remain composed. The sunflowers in Carter's hands trembled slightly, betraying his nervousness despite his confident words. The relationship started fake, Carter said, his voice breaking slightly as emotion overwhelmed corporate training. But somewhere between my mother's dinner table and a hotel terrace overlooking Central Park, it became the most real thing in my life. I fell completely, hopelessly, embarrassingly in love with Emma Thompson. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small blue box that made Emma's heart stop completely. The Tiffany blue was unmistakable, even from a distance, and the collective gasp from the crowd suggested everyone else recognized it too. Which brings me to why I'm here. Carter dropped to one knee right there on the sidewalk in front of the hospital, in front of the cameras, in front of half the town of Millfield, Ohio. The concrete was probably hard on his expensive trousers, and Emma noticed his hands were shaking as he held the ring box. Emma Jane Thompson, I know I have no right to ask this after everything that's happened. I know you have every reason to tell me to go back to New York and leave you alone. Emma couldn't breathe. The entire world had gone silent except for the sound of her heart pounding in her ears like thunder. She was dimly aware of Mrs. Henderson clutching her chest dramatically, of reporters holding their breath, of the morning sun creating a perfect spotlight on the most surreal moment of her life. But I'm asking anyway, because loving you has taught me that the biggest risks sometimes lead to the greatest rewards. Carter opened the box with trembling fingers, revealing a ring that caught the morning sunlight and threw rainbows across the hospital parking lot. The diamond was perfect, not ostentatiously large, but flawless in its simplicity, surrounded by smaller stones that sparkled like captured stars. Will you marry me? The silence stretched for what felt like 17 years. Emma stared at the ring, at Carter kneeling on the concrete in his expensive suit, at the cameras recording every second of what was either the most romantic gesture in history or the most public humiliation ever broadcast on morning television. You flew to Ohio, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I would have flown to Mars if that's where you were. You're proposing in a hospital parking lot. I would have proposed in a McDonald's drive-thru if that's where I found you. There are reporters filming this. Let them. I want the whole world to know that Carter Mitchell is crazy in love with Emma Thompson and doesn't care who knows it. His voice was steady now, sure of his words, despite the vulnerable position. I want everyone to see that the Emperor of Loneliness found his Empress, and he's willing to abdicate his throne for her. Emma looked into his eyes, those impossible blue eyes that had haunted her dreams for a week, and saw everything she'd been afraid to hope for. Love, commitment, a future that stretched beyond the next quarterly report and into something vast and beautiful and terrifying. The ring is beautiful, she said, her voice thick with tears. Carter's face lit up with the first real hope she'd seen. Is that a yes? That's the ring is beautiful. Emma stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of silver in his eyes, could smell his cologne mixed with the scent of airport coffee and nervous perspiration. "Carter, you can't just show up here with flowers and a ring and expect everything to be okay." His face fell like a building being demolished. "Emma, I know I hurt you. You didn't hurt me." Emma reached down and helped him to his feet, her hands warm against his cold fingers. "You scared me. You made me feel things I'd never felt before, want things I'd never thought I could have. And when it all fell apart, I wasn't just losing a fake boyfriend. I was losing the man I'd fallen in love with." Carter searched her face desperately. "You fell in love with me? Completely, hopelessly, embarrassingly." Emma smiled through her tears, aware that every word was being recorded but no longer caring. "I fell in love with a man who remembers everyone's coffee orders, who gets nervous before family dinners, who makes notes in the margins about figuring out what makes me laugh." "You saw that?" "I saw everything, Carter. I saw past the emperor of loneliness to the man who was just waiting for someone to notice he was there." Emma stepped closer, until they were almost touching. "I saw someone who built walls so high he forgot there was a world outside them, until someone clumsy enough to spill coffee on him accidentally knocked a few bricks loose." Carter cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears on her cheeks. "Emma, I promise you, if you say yes, if you take this leap with me, I will spend every day for the rest of my life proving that you made the right choice." Emma looked around at the cameras, the reporters, the neighbors, the circus that had become her quiet hometown morning. A week ago, this would have been her worst nightmare, being the center of attention, having her private life dissected by strangers, being judged by people who'd never walked in her shoes. Now, it just seemed like the perfect backdrop for the most important decision of her life. "You know what the crazy part is?" she said, taking the ring box from his hands. "What?" "I was already planning to call you." Carter blinked hard, as if he couldn't quite process the words. "You were?" Emma nodded toward the hospital. "My mom's been asking about you nonstop since I got home. She wants to meet the man who made me happy enough to hum while doing dishes." "You hum when you do dishes?" "Apparently it's a love symptom I wasn't aware of." Emma looked at the ring again, a perfect solitaire that caught the light like captured starfire. She also pointed out that running away from complicated doesn't make it less complicated. It just makes it complicated and lonely. "Your mother sounds like a wise woman." "She is. She's also dying, Carter." Emma's voice broke slightly. "The cancer's spreading faster than the doctors expected. That's why the hospital here couldn't help us anymore. That's why we need the specialized treatment that costs more than my parents' house." Carter's expression changed from hopeful to devastated to determined in the space of a heartbeat. "Emma, why didn't you tell me? I could have what? Paid for her treatment? Made her your charity case?" Emma shook her head. "Carter, I loved you, but I couldn't let you solve my problems with money. That's not love, that's dependency. But now I realize that love isn't about being too proud to accept help. It's about trusting someone enough to let them help you carry the load." Emma looked at the ring one more time, then met his eyes. "Carter, are you sure about this? Really sure? Because once I put this ring on, you're stuck with a girl from Ohio who thinks Olive Garden is fancy dining, and who will never ever fit into your Manhattan social scene." Carter laughed, the real laugh she'd fallen in love with, not his corporate chuckle. "Emma, I don't want you to fit into my world. I want to build a new world with you, one where we can be happy in a Manhattan penthouse or a small-town diner, as long as we're together. What about your image? Your reputation? The Emperor of Loneliness thing? Let them call me the Emperor of Love instead." Carter grinned. "I hear it's much better for the stock prices. Plus, Madison's been texting me marketing slogans for the past week. Apparently, love is the ultimate merger is trending on Twitter." Emma laughed despite herself. "That's terrible branding. Then you'll have to marry me and help me come up with something better." Emma looked at the ring one more time, then at Carter's hopeful face, then at the crowd of people waiting for her answer with the kind of anticipation usually reserved for sporting events and awards shows. She thought about her mother fighting cancer with dignity and grace, Her father teaching history to teenagers who'd rather be anywhere else. Her own dreams that had always seemed too big for a small town in Ohio. She thought about Carter's penthouse office, his family dinners, the way he looked at her like she was the most amazing discovery of his life rather than just another employee. She thought about fake relationships that became real love, about taking chances that scared you, about fairy tales that happened to ordinary girls who were brave enough to believe in them. "Yes," she said, loud enough for the cameras to catch, her voice carrying across the parking lot with perfect clarity. "Yes, I'll marry you, Carter Mitchell." The cheer that went up from the crowd was probably heard in the next county. Mrs. Henderson burst into tears and hugged the reporter standing next to her. The cameramen scrambled to get the best shots of Carter slipping the ring onto Emma's finger, with hands that shook slightly, but held steady when it mattered. Then he kissed her with the kind of passion that made the reporters sigh romantically despite themselves. The kind of kiss that belonged in movies and fairy tales and the front pages of newspapers across the country. When they finally broke apart, Emma was crying and laughing at the same time, and the ring on her finger caught the sunlight like a promise of everything beautiful that was coming. "I love you," Carter whispered against her forehead. His words meant only for her despite the audience. "I love you too, but we're doing the wedding in Ohio. Anywhere you want. And my dad's walking me down the aisle. I wouldn't have it any other way. And we're having the reception at the VFW hall because that's where everyone in this town gets married." Carter paused, his expression carefully neutral. "The VFW hall? With a DJ who still plays music from the 80s and a cash bar that serves beer in plastic cups and potato salad that Mrs. Patterson makes every year, using the same recipe from 1987. Carter considered this information with the same seriousness he usually reserved for merger agreements. "Will there be line dancing?" "Absolutely. It's required by small-town law. Then I'll start practicing the electric slide immediately, and the Macarena, and whatever that thing is where everyone forms a train." Emma burst into laughter, and Carter spun her around in the hospital parking lot, while cameras flashed and reporters cheered, and Mrs. Henderson told anyone who would listen that she'd always known that Thompson girl would make something of herself, mark her words. Later, after the reporters had gotten their stories and the neighbors had returned to their normal Tuesday morning routines, Emma and Carter made their way back into the hospital. The oncology wing felt different now, less like a place of waiting and uncertainty, more like just another stop on the journey toward whatever came next. Emma's parents were waiting in Linda's room, both trying to look like they hadn't been glued to the window, watching the entire proposal unfold in the parking lot below. "So," Robert said as they entered, not bothering to hide his grin, "I take it the young man's intentions are honorable." "Dad," Emma protested, but she was smiling too widely to sound exasperated. Linda was sitting up straighter than she had in weeks, her eyes bright with the kind of energy that comes from witnessing something truly magical. "Let me see that ring, sweetheart." Emma extended her hand, and Linda examined the engagement ring with the critical eye of someone who'd spent 35 years admiring her own wedding band. "Good choice," Linda said to Carter approvingly. "Classic, elegant, not too flashy. Shows you have taste and restraint." "Thank you, Mrs. Thompson. I wanted something that would suit Emma perfectly." "You can call me Mom now," Linda said firmly. "Anyone who makes my daughter this happy has earned first-name privileges." Carter looked genuinely touched. "Thank you, Mom." Robert cleared his throat. "And you can call me Robert. Eventually, after you've proven you can change a diaper and fix a leaky faucet." "Dad!" Emma laughed. "What?" "These are important life skills for married men," Robert defended. "I'm not sending my daughter off with someone who calls a handyman every time a light bulb burns out." "I can change light bulbs," Carter said solemnly, "and I'm a quick learner on the other things." "Good man." Robert nodded approvingly. "Emma, your young man has potential." As the morning progressed, Carter's family began arriving. First Madison, who'd apparently driven through the night from Chicago and arrived with a car full of coffee, bagels, and what appeared to be an entire flower shop's worth of arrangements. "Emma!" Madison launched herself at her future sister-in-law with the enthusiasm of someone who'd been waiting her whole life for Carter to find happiness. I cannot believe he proposed in a parking lot. A parking lot. I mean, it's romantic in a completely unexpected way, but still. Carter, we need to work on your venue selection skills. The parking lot was perfect, Emma said firmly. It was real and honest and completely us. I love her already, Madison declared to the room at large. Carter, do not mess this up. I'll do my best, Carter said dryly. Victoria and Richard Mitchell arrived an hour later, having taken a private jet from New York, and then a rental car from Columbus because, as Victoria explained, one doesn't arrive at one's future daughter-in-law's family home in a limousine. It sends the wrong message. Emma watched nervously as Carter's elegant, sophisticated mother met her own parents in the small hospital room that suddenly felt even smaller. Victoria was wearing a perfectly tailored suit that probably cost more than Emma's car, her silver hair styled in a way that suggested professional intervention, her jewelry understated but clearly expensive. Linda Thompson was in a hospital gown, her hair covered by a colorful scarf Emma had brought from New York, her face pale from chemotherapy, but her smile warm and genuine. For a moment, Emma worried about the contrast. Manhattan sophistication meeting small-town reality, wealth meeting illness, different worlds colliding in ways that might not mix well. Then Victoria took Linda's hand gently and said, "Mrs. Thompson, I want to thank you for raising the woman who saved my son. Please call me Linda." And Emma didn't save anyone. She just loved him enough to see past all that expensive armor he wears. Victoria laughed, a sound of genuine delight. You're absolutely right. Carter's always been good at building walls. Emma's the first person brave enough to knock them down. Or clumsy enough to trip over them, Linda said with a wink at Emma. This one's been knocking things over since she learned to walk. Mom, Emma groaned, but she was smiling. But she... Richard Mitchell was deep in conversation with Robert about Ohio State football, discovering they shared not only similar opinions about coaching strategies, but also a mutual respect for the kind of dedication it took to teach young people anything useful. So you've been teaching high school history for 30 years? Richard asked. 32 this fall, Robert confirmed. Same school Emma graduated from. Still using some of the same textbooks, unfortunately, but the kids keep getting smarter, even when the budget doesn't. That's incredible. I have enormous respect for educators. Carter's told me some of the stories Emma shared about growing up with a father who made history come alive. Emma watched the two men bond over shared stories about stubborn teenagers and the satisfaction of watching young people discover their potential, while their wives compared notes on everything from cancer treatments to wedding planning to the challenges of raising successful children who still needed guidance even as adults. You know, Victoria said thoughtfully, I think we should hold the engagement party at our house in the Hamptons. Nothing too elaborate, just family and close friends. Actually, Emma said carefully, we were thinking of something smaller, more casual. Madison looked up from her phone where she'd been frantically texting updates to what appeared to be half of Manhattan. Define casual. Well, Emma glanced at Carter for support. We thought maybe the backyard here. Dad could barbecue, Mom could make her famous potato salad when she's feeling better, and we could just keep it simple. The room went quiet for a moment. Emma worried she'd somehow offended Carter's family with her small-town sensibilities. Then Victoria clapped her hands together with delight. That sounds absolutely perfect. Richard, when's the last time we went to a real backyard barbecue? 1987, Richard said immediately. Your sister's house in Connecticut. You spent the entire party worried about grass stains on your white pants. Well, I'll wear appropriate barbecue attire this time, Victoria declared. Emma, I would be honored to attend a backyard engagement party. Should I bring anything? I make a reasonable fruit salad, though I should warn you it involves exotic ingredients from Whole Foods. Emma felt her heart swell with affection for this woman who could have insisted on champagne and caviar, but was instead excited about potato salad and backyard grills. As the afternoon wore on, the hospital room became the center of an impromptu family reunion. Madison was helping Linda plan wedding decorations using magazines she'd apparently purchased at every gift shop between Chicago and Ohio. Robert and Richard were debating the merits of various historical documentaries, while Victoria asked detailed questions about Linda's treatment plan with the focused attention of someone accustomed to solving complex problems. And Carter sat quietly beside Emma's hospital bed, holding her hand and looking like he'd never been happier in his life. "This is nice," he said quietly during a lull in conversation. "What is?" "Family. Real family. The kind that argues about football and shares embarrassing stories and makes you feel like you belong somewhere." Emma squeezed his hand. "You've always had family, Carter." "I've had relatives. This is different." He looked around the room at the mix of people who, 24 hours ago, had been strangers and now felt like they'd known each other for years. "This is what I was missing." "What you gave me." "We gave each other something," Emma corrected. "You gave me confidence, adventure, the belief that I could be part of something bigger than small-town Ohio. And you gave me roots, purpose, someone to come home to." Madison looked up from her magazine. "Are you two being disgustingly romantic over there? Because I'm trying to plan your wedding and I can't concentrate with all the lovey-dovey whispering." "We're not whispering," Emma protested. "You're using your couple voice. It's different from your regular voice, more intimate." Carter raised an eyebrow. "I have a couple voice?" "Oh, you definitely have a couple voice," Victoria agreed. "You've had it since that first dinner when you brought Emma home. It's softer than your business voice, more human." "More human," Carter repeated thoughtfully. "I like that." "You should," Robert said from his chair by the window. "Took you long enough to find it." As evening approached, the Mitchell family prepared to head back to their hotel in Columbus, promising to return the next day for what Linda was already calling proper wedding planning. Madison hugged everyone twice, including the nurse who came to check Linda's vitals. Victoria kissed Linda's cheek and whispered something that made Emma's mother smile. Richard shook Robert's hand with the gravity of two men who'd found unexpected friendship. And Carter lingered beside Linda's bed, his expression serious. "Mrs. Thompson, Mom," he corrected himself. "I want you to know that I'm going to take care of Emma. Whatever she needs, whatever you need as a family, there are no limits." Linda reached for his hand. "Carter, honey, I appreciate that more than you know, but Emma doesn't need taking care of. She needs partnership. She needs someone who sees her as an equal, not a responsibility." "I do see her as an equal," Carter said immediately. "I know you do. That's why I'm not worried about giving her to you." Linda's voice was getting weaker as the day's excitement caught up with her, but her words were clear. "Just promise me something. Anything. Promise me you'll let her take care of you too. That man my daughter fell in love with. The one who gets nervous before family dinners and makes notes about what makes her laugh. Don't let success make you forget him again." Carter was quiet for a long moment. "I promise." "Good." Linda settled back against her pillows with a satisfied sigh. "Now take my daughter out for a proper dinner. There's a little Italian place downtown that's been there since I was young. Nothing fancy, but the portions are enormous and the owner remembers everyone's name." Later that evening, Emma and Carter sat in Lucia's Italian restaurant, a tiny place with checkered tablecloths and candles stuck in wine bottles that had probably been accumulating wax since the Carter administration. The owner, Mrs. Lucia herself, had indeed remembered Emma's name and had spent 10 minutes interrogating Carter about his intentions before seating them at the best table in the house. A corner booth with a view of the kitchen and the sound of her husband Tony singing opera, while he made pasta. "So," Emma said, twirling spaghetti around her fork with the expertise of someone who'd grown up on comfort food, "tell me about this medical fund you set up." Carter nearly choked on his wine. "How did you—" Mrs. Lucia mentioned that someone had called the hospital this afternoon and paid off every cancer patient's outstanding balance. Someone with a very authoritative voice and a Manhattan area code. Emma raised an eyebrow. "Ring any bells?" Carter looked sheepish. "I may have made a few phone calls." A few phone calls that resulted in 17 families suddenly having their medical debts forgiven? 18 families. Mrs. Patterson's husband needed heart surgery last month. Emma stared at him across the small table, the candlelight flickering across his face and making him look younger, more vulnerable. Carter, that must have cost less than I spend on wine in a year, Carter interrupted. Emma, you think I'm being generous, but this is selfish. I'm buying myself peace of mind. I'm making sure that no one in this town has to choose between medical care and paying rent, because I can't stand the thought of you worrying about anyone else the way you worried about your mother. That's not selfish. That's love. Is it because it feels like I'm trying to solve problems with money again? Emma reached across the table and took his hand, her engagement ring catching the candlelight. Carter, there's a difference between throwing money at a problem to make it go away and using your resources to help people you care about. What you did today, that's the difference between charity and family. Carter was quiet for a moment, studying their intertwined fingers. I've never had family like this before. People who argue about football and tease each other and worry about whether you're eating enough vegetables. It's overwhelming. In a good way? In the best way. Carter lifted her hand and kissed her knuckles right above the ring. Emma, I need to tell you something else. About Vanessa, about what happened at the gala. Emma's stomach tightened. Carter, we don't have to. Yes, we do. Because there are going to be more Vanessas in our future. More people who think they understand our relationship better than we do. More reporters looking for scandal. More social events where I'll be the billionaire and you'll be the girl from Ohio who doesn't belong. Emma felt a familiar chill of doubt. Maybe they're right. They're wrong. Carter's voice carried absolute conviction. They're wrong because they think your worth is measured by your bank account or your zip code, or whether you know which fork to use for the salad course. But I know better. Do you? I know that you're the bravest person I've ever met because you left everything familiar to chase a dream in New York. I know you're the most compassionate person I've ever met because you sent most of your paycheck home to help your parents without ever complaining or asking for recognition. I know you're the smartest person I've ever met because you saw through all my expensive armor to the lonely man underneath. Carter's voice grew stronger, more passionate. And I know you're the strongest person I've ever met because when everything fell apart, you didn't stay and fight for what was easy. You came home and fought for what was right. Emma felt tears starting again. Carter. So let them think you don't belong in my world, Emma. Because you don't. You belong in our world, the one we're going to build together. Where success is measured by how many people you help, where family dinners matter more than board meetings, where the most important merger is the one between two people who choose each other every single day. Emma was full-on crying now, not caring that Mrs. Lucia was probably watching from behind the kitchen door, or that her mascara was definitely running. How do you do that? She asked through her tears. Do what? Say exactly the right thing at exactly the right moment. Carter grinned. I've been practicing. Madison's been coaching me on romantic speeches. Apparently, I have a tendency to sound like I'm giving quarterly projections even when I'm declaring my love. Emma laughed through her tears. I love your quarterly projection voice. Even when I'm explaining why our relationship is a sound investment with excellent growth potential. Especially then. They finished dinner while Mrs. Lucia and Tony serenaded them with opera, and the other patrons, all locals who'd known Emma since childhood, stopped by their table to congratulate them and offer unsolicited wedding advice. By the time they left, Emma's cheeks hurt from smiling, and Carter had been invited to join the Millfield Historical Society, the volunteer fire department, and something called the annual Corn Festival Planning Committee. You realize they're adopting you, Emma said as they walked hand in hand down Main Street, past the shops where she'd bought school supplies and prom dresses and her first car. Is that what this is? I thought Mr. Henderson was genuinely interested in my opinions on corn maze design. Oh, he is. But he's also making sure you're invested in the community. It's small-town strategy. If you care about the corn festival, you'll stick around. Carter stopped walking and turned to face her under a streetlight that had been flickering for as long as Emma could remember. Emma, I need you to understand something. I'm not just sticking around for the corn festival or because your parents are wonderful, or because your mother makes the best potato salad in Ohio. No, I'm sticking around because you're here, because wherever you are is where I want to be. If you wanted to move to Alaska and raise sled dogs, I'd start researching the best parkas money can buy. Emma smiled up at him. What if I wanted to stay right here in Millfield? What if I never wanted to leave Ohio again? Carter was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. Then I'd learn to love Ohio. I'd move the company headquarters if I had to. I'd become the best small-town billionaire in the history of small-town billionaires. You'd really do that? Emma, I've spent my whole life building an empire that was supposed to make me happy. But it turns out empires are pretty lonely places when you don't have anyone to share them with. Carter cupped her face in his hands. You're my happiness. Everything else is just details. Emma stood on her tiptoes and kissed him under the flickering streetlight, tasting wine and promises and the sweet possibility of forever. So what now? She asked when they broke apart. Now we plan a wedding, and I start practicing the electric slide. Don't forget the Macarena. I would never forget the Macarena. I'm taking this very seriously. Madison's already sent me YouTube tutorials. Emma burst into laughter. I love you, Carter Mitchell. I love you too, Emma Thompson, soon to be Emma Mitchell. Soon to be the happiest woman in Ohio. Just Ohio? Okay, fine. The entire Midwest. Carter grinned. Now you're thinking like a CEO's wife. Future CEO's wife, Emma corrected. We're not married yet. Details, Carter said, spinning her around under the streetlight while she laughed. Just details. 3 months later, the Millfield VFW Hall had been transformed into something between a fairy tale and a family reunion. White lights strung from the ceiling mixed with paper lanterns made by the local high school art class. Flowers from every garden in town. Roses from Mrs. Henderson. Sunflowers from the Pattersons. Daisies from the elementary school. Filled mason jars on every table. Emma stood in the small kitchen that served as a makeshift bridal suite, looking at herself in a mirror that had probably reflected decades of VFW hall brides. Her dress was simple but elegant, not the designer gown Victoria had offered to buy, but a vintage lace dress from a boutique in Columbus that made her feel like herself, only better. You look beautiful, sweetheart, Linda said from her chair by the window. The chemotherapy had been brutal, but it was working, slowly, gradually, giving them hope where there had been none. She was still thin, still tired easily, but she was there, and that was what mattered. Thanks, Mom. Emma adjusted the small pearl necklace that had been her grandmother's. Are you sure you're feeling up to this? Emma Jane Thompson. I wouldn't miss my daughter's wedding if I had to be carried in on a stretcher. Linda's voice was firm despite her physical frailty. Besides, someone has to make sure your father doesn't cry during his speech. Dorisu, through the kitchen window, Emma could see the reception hall filling up with an unlikely mix of people. Manhattan socialites in designer dresses mingling with local farmers in their Sunday best. Carter's business associates talking corn prices with retired factory workers. Madison teaching a group of teenagers the proper way to photograph a wedding for social media. Victoria Mitchell was deep in conversation with Mrs. Lucia about catering options for the rehearsal dinner, while Richard Mitchell and Robert Thompson were setting up a sound system that had been old when Emma was in high school. And in the center of it all, looking devastatingly handsome in a tuxedo but somehow completely at home, was Carter. He was talking to the local Methodist minister who would be performing the ceremony, gesturing with his hands in that precise way he had when he was explaining something important. He fits, Linda observed, following Emma's gaze. What? You're Carter. He fits here. I wasn't sure he would, but look at him, talking to Pastor Williams like they've known each other for years, helping your father with those speakers, making sure Mrs. Patterson has somewhere to sit where she can see everything. Linda smiled. That's not the behavior of a man who's slumming it. That's the behavior of a man who's home. Emma felt her eyes well up with tears. "Mom, you're going to make me cry and ruin my makeup. Madison will fix it. That girl came prepared for every cosmetic emergency known to womankind." As if summoned, Madison appeared in the kitchen doorway with her arms full of makeup supplies and her hair styled in an elaborate updo that had probably taken 3 hours to achieve. "Emma, you look gorgeous, but we need to touch up your lipstick and add a little more mascara for the photos." Madison set down her supplies and immediately began fussing with Emma's appearance. "Also, your groom is pacing outside like a caged tiger. I think he's nervous." "Carter's nervous?" "Completely. It's adorable. He keeps checking his watch and asking if you've changed your mind." Madison applied lipstick with professional precision. "I told him that you'd have to be crazy to change your mind about marrying the man who paid for an entire town's medical bills. But he's still worried you're going to come to your senses and run away." Emma laughed. "I'm not running anywhere." "Good, because he also keeps asking if the minister is licensed to perform weddings in Ohio, if the rings are where they're supposed to be, and whether anyone's checked the weather forecast for the outdoor photos. I think success in business requires a certain amount of paranoia about details. Or maybe he just wants everything to be perfect. Either way, it's sweet." Madison stepped back to examine her work. "There, perfect. You ready to go make that man the happiest billionaire in Ohio?" Emma looked in the mirror one more time, seeing not just herself but the reflection of everyone who'd helped her get to this moment. Her mother's strength, her father's steady love, Madison's friendship, Carter's transformative love. She looked like a bride, but more than that, she looked like herself. "I'm ready." The ceremony was everything Emma had dreamed of and nothing she'd expected. The VFW hall was packed with 300 people who'd come from across the country to witness the marriage of the Emperor of Loneliness to the girl who'd taught him how to be human. Emma walked down the aisle on her father's arm, past faces that told the story of her life. Elementary school teachers, high school friends, college roommates, New York colleagues, and Carter's family who'd welcomed her as one of their own. But she only had eyes for Carter, who stood at the makeshift altar with tears in his eyes and a smile that could have powered the entire town. The ceremony itself was simple but meaningful. Pastor Williams spoke about love as a choice rather than just a feeling, about the commitment required to build a life together, about the way two people could become stronger as a unit than they'd ever been alone. When it came time for vows, Carter spoke first, his CEO voice replaced by something softer, more personal. "Emma, 6 months ago, I thought I had everything a man could want. Success, wealth, respect, all the things I'd been taught to value. But I didn't have joy. I didn't have laughter. I didn't have anyone to share the good moments with or help me through the bad ones." His voice was steady, but Emma could see his hands trembling slightly as he held hers. "You changed everything. You made me remember what it felt like to be surprised, to be challenged, to be loved for who I am rather than what I own. You made me want to be worthy of the man you saw when you looked past all my expensive armor." Carter paused, taking a deep breath. "I promise to love you not just when it's easy, but when it's hard. I promise to choose you not just today, but every day for the rest of our lives. I promise to be your partner in building a life that's measured not by what we accomplish individually, but by what we create together." Emma was crying by the time he finished, and she wasn't the only one. Half the congregation was dabbing at their eyes with tissues Madison had thoughtfully placed on every table. When it was Emma's turn, she looked out at the sea of faces, friends, family, people who'd shaped her into the woman she'd become, then back at Carter. "Carter, when I first met you, I thought you were exactly what everyone said you were. The Emperor of Loneliness, a man who'd traded his heart for success. But you taught me that sometimes the most difficult people to love are the ones who need it most." Emma's voice grew stronger as she continued. "You showed me that love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone worth fighting for, worth growing with, worth choosing over and over again even when they leave dishes in the sink or work too late, or forget to put gas in the car. The congregation chuckled softly. I promise to challenge you when you need challenging, to support you when you need support, and to love you exactly as you are while helping you become everything you're meant to be. I promise to build a life with you that's big enough for both our dreams and strong enough to weather whatever storms come our way. When Pastor Williams pronounced them husband and wife, Carter kissed Emma with such joy that the entire hall erupted in cheers and applause that could probably be heard 3 counties away. The reception was exactly what Emma had envisioned, a perfect mix of elegance and small-town charm. The DJ did indeed play music from the 80s. The cash bar did serve beer in plastic cups, and Mrs. Patterson's potato salad was the first dish to empty. Carter's first dance with Emma was to a song from 1987 that nobody under 30 recognized, but that had the older generation singing along. He held her close and whispered in her ear about how beautiful she looked, how happy he was, how he couldn't wait to spend the rest of his life learning to be the husband she deserved. You realize this makes you officially small town now, Emma said as they swayed to music that was older than some of their wedding guests. Does it? Completely. You're married to a girl from Ohio, you've joined the volunteer fire department, and you promised to sponsor the annual corn festival. There's no going back now. Carter grinned. Good. I was getting tired of being sophisticated all the time. The electric slide was indeed required, and Carter's attempt at it was so enthusiastic and so completely wrong that it became the hit of the evening. Madison filmed the entire thing for posterity, while Victoria and Linda laughed until they cried watching the CEO of a billion-dollar company get tangled up in a line dance with a group of retirees who'd been perfecting their moves for decades. Later, much later, after the last guest had gone home and the VFW hall had been cleaned up, Emma and Carter sat on the steps outside, still in their wedding clothes, sharing a piece of leftover cake and watching the sun rise over the small town that had become the center of their universe. So, Emma said, her head on Carter's shoulder, how does it feel to be married to a small-town girl? Carter was quiet for a moment, considering the question. It feels like I've been holding my breath my entire life, and I can finally exhale. That's very poetic for a CEO. I've been taking lessons from Madison. She says I need to work on my romantic vocabulary. Emma laughed, the sound carrying across the empty street and mixing with the morning sounds of a small town waking up. Birds singing, dogs barking, the distant sound of someone starting their car to head to an early shift. I love you, Mr. Mitchell. I love you too, Mrs. Mitchell. Emma smiled at her new name, at the ring on her finger, at the man beside her who'd traveled from Manhattan to small-town Ohio to find his heart. So what now? Carter stood up and pulled her to her feet, spinning her around one more time in her wedding dress as the sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. Now we live happily ever after, he said, just like in the fairy tales, except better. Better how? Carter kissed her forehead, her nose, her lips tasting wedding cake and champagne, and the sweet promise of all their tomorrows. Because this is real. The end epilogue. 1 year later, the first annual Mitchell Foundation Corn Festival was, by all accounts, the most successful community event in Millfield's history. Carter had insisted on sponsoring everything from the prize money for the largest pumpkin contest to the new stage where local bands performed between corn dog sales and ring toss games. Emma stood beside the dunk tank, watching her husband in a three-piece suit get repeatedly soaked by teenagers with surprisingly good aim and unlimited enthusiasm. Every time he went under, he came up laughing, a sound that never failed to make her heart skip. Emma! Madison jogged over, slightly out of breath and carrying what appeared to be a corn dog covered in enough powdered sugar to supply a small bakery. Your husband is going to catch pneumonia in that dunk tank. He insisted on it. Something about community engagement and corporate responsibility. He's been reading too many small-town lifestyle magazines. Madison took a bite of her questionable food choice. Oh, before I forget, the Times wants to do a follow-up story about your marriage. From fake romance to real love a year later. Interested? Emma watched Carter pull himself out of the dunk tank for the 15th time, his hair dripping and his expensive suit completely ruined, grinning at the kids like he was having the time of his life. You know what? Yes, let's do it. Really. Really. I think it's time people knew that fairy tales don't end with the wedding, they just get better. Madison followed Emma's gaze to where Carter was now attempting to dry off with a towel that clearly belonged in someone's garage rather than a five-star hotel. He's completely different from the man I used to know. No, Emma said softly. He's exactly the same. He just finally has permission to be himself. As if sensing her watching, Carter looked across the festival crowd and caught her eye. His smile was bright enough to power the entire corn maze, and when he waved at her with both hands like an overexcited child, Emma felt that familiar flutter in her chest that told her she was still, impossibly, falling more in love with him every day. She waved back, her wedding ring catching the sunlight, and mouthed the words that had become their daily promise to each other. Forever. Carter mouthed back, and always. Then he turned back to the dunk tank line, where Mrs. Patterson was waiting with a baseball and a determined expression, and Emma laughed at the beautiful absurdity of her life. The Emperor of Loneliness had found his kingdom after all, not in a Manhattan penthouse or a corporate boardroom, but in a small town in Ohio where love mattered more than stock prices, and the most important merger of all was the one that happened every morning when two people woke up and chose each other all over again. And if that wasn't a perfect fairy tale ending, Emma didn't know what was.